Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Glad to be talking on this episode with comics creator Russ Leach. Russ, may I call you Russ? Is that okay?
Yes, of course. No problem at all. Yeah.
All right. I'm appreciating your sock monkey there, as well as Marvin the Martian overseeing this
So,
exchange.
yeah, T Monkey and Marvin and Batman and stuff. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, I was checking out some of your Batman art just a little bit ago on social media as well.
Oh, great. Good.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll mention a few titles here at the beginning, and then we can talk about whichever ones you want to focus on a little bit,
Sure.
and also some pretty general questions. So Red
Mhm.
Angel being one of those of yours
Oh,
that I've enjoyed.
wow. That's a long time ago.
2011, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so some
Yeah.
nice steampunk approach there, and then Terminus at Fenton's Green.
Yeah. That was my first graphic novel. Yeah.
A very, very fascinating graphic novel. Lots of horror elements and
Mm, yeah.
psychological things
Yeah.
mixing
Adam
into
did a
play.
great job on the writing on that. Yeah. I really enjoyed it.
Well, and you were wonderful as the artist as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then you also have Only Death Can Save Us, which is a more
Yeah.
recent one.
Yeah. That's my own creation. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and you are both author and artist on that. Is that right?
Yes. Author and artist, although Rick, where are we? Where's the book one? I worked with Rick Hoskin on Doctor Who,
Mm-hmm.
and Tim Quinn, who is an ex-Marvel editor, offered to help out as well, who I knew personally. So Rick came on board for the first book just to help me with dialogue and a couple of bits and pieces of the plot. But it was basically my concept and my idea, and I wrote the whole script out for him to take a look at. And then in the second book, I gave him a loose plot synopsis, and he built the story around that. So we're kind of partnering on that now. But yeah, the original concept was all mine. So
Love it, love it. All right. So let me back up just a touch, and then we can talk
sure,
about
sure.
those books and other ones as well. What about comics drew you in? Why comics?
You probably get the same answer from an awful lot of artists, especially my age. It's just something I loved as a kid. It
Hmm.
spoke to me on a very basic level. Um, I got my first comics when I was probably about 4 or 5. I think
Yeah.
the first comic I actively remember copying art out of was a DC comic called, and I've got them up there, and I can't remember their name. Something you will have to forgive me, or is I'm awful with names.
No,
Uh,
no worries, no worries.
so 2 seconds, and I'll grab it off the shelf.
Sure, sure.
That's it. There we go. I
I
actually I
love
bought
that you have
myself.
it right there too.
Yeah, it's all up there. Um, I bought myself these copies just recently of Stalker magazine.
Oh, nice, nice.
And I got the first 4 issues on from a reseller, and they're lovely, absolutely lovely. And so this was the first. This very book, this very comic, Stalker here, was the book I remember drawing out of as a very young child. And then late 70s, I started to get my own money from, well, my own money. My mum and dad used to give me an allowance, as yeah, we call it, pocket money. not
Hmm.
not much, but it was enough to get my first book that I bought myself on a regular basis, which was Captain Britain,
Hmm.
the original incarnation of that. And so it just went from there, really. I just fell in love with comics. Obviously, on the TV at the time, you had Doctor Who, you had reruns of the original Star Trek and stuff like that, which I loved.
Hmm.
Um, and just comics just seemed to be a visualization of that. And also, I had a bent towards drawing anyway and artwork, so it just all fell from there, I suppose.
Love it, love it. And so, what was the path like from sort of those early childhood readings to creating in the world of comics and
Oh,
publishing?
oh, that's a long curvy road. Um, it's obviously something I always wanted to do. I remember copying pages of Micronauts out
Mhm, mhm,
when I was at senior school, around 11 or so. Um, and it was just something I knew I always wanted to do, but could never kind of work out how I could do it.
mhm,
I knew Marvel was always the thing for me. I loved Marvel as a kid, although Batman and Superman obviously turned up, and you ask any artist, what's the character they want to draw, and 8 out of 10 will go Batman.
mhm, mhm.
So that was a de facto. Batman was a de facto. I loved the series on as a kid, the old Adam West series.
Yeah,
When I went
yeah,
through the angst of teenage years up into early 20s, I despised it, and then came back and realized what genius it was later on in life.
yeah.
But it kind of I went to college. I went to art college. I did a pre-degree course, did a diploma in design, and then it ended up going into the design industry. I went into publishing and production, um, uh, point of sale, that kind of stuff, retail,
Mhm,
as well as going through holiday brochures and magazines and all kinds of stuff like that, designing. All the time loving comics, but not really knowing quite how to, get involved.
mhm.
Um, it did strike me after a while that maybe the only way to do it was to live in New York, and that was never going to happen. There were obviously things like 2000 AD over in the UK and
Mhm.
Star-Lord and stuff like that, which again I did enjoy, buy a lot of when I was younger. Um, uh, and they felt they felt difficult to get to as well. I mean, obviously they weren't completely impossible because people did get to draw for them, but I kind of never worked out at an early age how to get there. So I carried on with an art and design career. Mid 90s, I penciled some stuff up and sent it into Marvel.
Mhm.
Back then, it was snail mail. There was no email, so everything was done long distance and over a period of time. I remember the new talent manager was John Louis Lewandowski, and he got back to me and said he loved my work and that he'd pass my stuff around the editors. But that's a really short story. I mean, that lasted for 6 months backwards and forwards.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
I think it ended up in 95, 96. I even ended up talking to Kevin Hopgood. I think it's Hopgood, the Iron Man artist who's, yeah, I think it's Hopgood, who was
Mhm.
based over here, and he was very pleasant to me on the phone and what have you. I'd been given his number. And I spoke to an editor over at 2000 AD as well, and he gave me some great advice. Um, and with one thing or another, it just didn't happen. I had a mortgage, I had kids,
Mhm.
so I carried on art directing. Um, I ended up getting heavily involved in digital asset management, and then producing online environments. So I ended up getting into coding. Had my own business from 2000 to 2009, doing
Oh.
exactly that kind of stuff. And for one reason or another, I mean, it was successful enough, but it wasn't the kind of business that you could hand off to your kids.
Mhm. Mhm.
It wasn't that kind of business. And through one reason or other, we decided to move on and do some other projects, which I did. I did another couple of digital projects, and it occurred to me that then was the time. I
Mhm.
was getting on, and if I really loved it, I should give it a go.
Yeah.
And I felt that I'd had a career in publishing that I kind of was experienced enough to give it a good crack.
Uh-huh.
Um, Very naive of me, considering how much I knew in business and how much I knew in production. Coming into the comic book industry was eye-opening, let's say. Um, so I gave it a go, and my after a year or two, we realised that if I was gonna make this work, I had to give it my all. I had to give it my
Mhm.
soul,
Mhm.
and I had to believe in myself. Unfortunately, my wife believed in me as well, and we sold our house and got a smaller place and got rid of our mortgage.
Wow.
And what that meant was a quality of, because to be honest, it wasn't just about being an illustrator. it was also quality of life. I didn't want to give my soul to a corporate and not see my family.
Yeah.
And I got to a point where, fortunately, because of the work that I'd done in my own career, our mortgage was movable. I could get rid of it. So I did that. We moved to a smaller place further out in the country, and yeah, that's when I started picking up lower paid jobs. I got, low paid gigs, indie gigs, all kinds of stuff. In fact, the first thing I did was for is it New Baby Productions? I think that's what they called themselves. And I did like a spin on H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, and the Time Machine. I think it was called the Chrononauts or something like that. Anyway, it was my first ever go at something really, substantial. It was 100 pages. I got paid next to nothing for it, but I did meet through it who was the writer, who was doing various things at the time, Jason Quinn. And Jason Quinn and I ended up having a conversation, and we got on. He liked what I did with it. The book never actually got published. I got a sample of it, but it never got published. And then so I went on and did other, indie work and did whatever I could. I got involved with Unstoppable Comics. That's JD Rosario, hails out of New York, and also the Red Angel stuff as well that I mentioned earlier. And I just did, stuff. I felt that even though it was low pay, I was getting paid to learn, because even though I'd been in a career of production, I hadn't learned huge amounts about, the art of making comics. And I came back with a more mature view. I'm glad I didn't get the work. I'm glad I didn't get the gig in the 90s, because I don't think I'd have developed in the way that I have. And coming in later meant that I could appreciate other styles, other approaches far more widely than I could have done when I was younger. I'd just learned more. I'd become more mature, and it meant that I approached my work slightly differently. Um, I got a quick start because I started using a Wacom very early on. Instead of I used to draw on paper direct when I back in the 90s when I spoke to Marvel. But when I came back, I'd done so much technical work, technology work, that I was drawn towards using the Wacom and drawing on screen. So I started doing that, and I was scared stiff of an ink pen and a brush. Right, where was I? Where was I? I've completely lost train of thought now.
You were talking about how you, I think you said ink sort of scared you.
Oh, that's right. Yes, I was talking about Wacoms and how I'd got when I finally came back to illustration. I was kind of scared of inks and what have you. So I went straight into the technical side, straight into using digital tools. And eventually, that actually turned out as a sort of a bit of a quick route to finding my style, because I launched myself at it, lived it, did it, and now I actually ink exclusively traditionally, unless I'm doing storyboards or something like that, where it's just digital. If I'm doing comic book pages, I draw them digitally, so the same as if I was using a light box. I consider layers much like using a light box, really, and then I pump it out to Blue Line, and I ink it with dip pens, brushes. Brush pens are great now, and any kind of stuff that I can get to make it work. So I kind of had a really weird turnaround way of coming at it. But that aside, going through the indie work that I did, Jason had gone off to Campfire graphic novels in India and had done exceptionally well over there, and he wanted to come back to the UK. So he came back in 2014, I think, around there, and he approached me to do some work with him, which didn't work out in the end. It was a Pokemon thing. But then in January of 2015, the BBC had this magazine called Doctor Who Adventures magazine, and the publisher at the time wanted to move away and do something else. So they said, "Could you take it on to Panini?" And Panini said yes. And so Jason was given the job as editor, and he called me up, and that was it. That was my first professional gig.
Nice.
So that's, you know, like when people say, how do you get into comics? It's like, well, how do you get out of a prison? How do you escape from a prison? Every escape is unique, you know, like, and it's the same
Right.
with getting into comics. Everybody's journey in is unique. So, you know, I've been fortunate since then to work on multiple, you know, IPs. I did a lot of Marvel characters. I've never actually worked for an editorial for Marvel, but I did a lot of Marvel character work for How to Draw the Marvel Way, which went on for 4 or 5 years. I did a lot of Doctor Who magazine. I've not worked for Titan, but I've done a lot of work for Panini on it. I did a Ben 10 strip for a while, which was great. Worked directly with Warner Brothers on that. And I got to do the Batman strip as well, which was only short-lived, but I got to draw Batman, so big tick.
Yep,
I
absolutely.
can die a happy artist now. I did Batman, yeah. So and then interspersed with all that, all other kinds of work came my way, just because, you know, you get involved. So for instance, you know, I worked with Rick on Doctor Who Adventures, and he put me in the direction of another company that ended up asking me to do a huge job for them in AI. It was actually AI story driven stuff, and I did some film storyboarding for a while and all kinds of other things. So I suppose the lesson from that is stay agile, do lots of different things. You can't expect just to draw comics. But if you do get a you know, a reasonably long-term gig, so I did Doctor Who Adventures for 2 years. I did a stint on Doctor Who magazine for just over a year. I did a stint with Ben 10 for a year. I did a stint with Batman for a year. If you do get them, you know, be on time, get the work done.
Yeah,
don't mess
definitely.
about. Don't flake out. Be there. And I think maybe going full circle, that's where having the career I did have prior to coming to comics has actually helped me, because I hit deadlines, I make sure I get the brief right and all that kind of stuff. So that's
Yeah.
a sort of a rambling road, but that's kind of how I ended up where I am now. So
Yeah, no, very cool, very cool. And not bad at all to start out with Doctor Who as the first
ah
professional gig. That's a
no,
big one.
no. I mean, I did do cartwheels around the room while I could still do them back then. Yeah, it's my wife. I just showed the email to my wife, and she's looking over my shoulder like, "Oh my God, you know,
Yeah.
well done." The Doctor Who is I suppose it's the British. I suppose you could put Doctor Who up there with maybe Judge Dredd, but even then, Doctor Who transcends comics and stuff. It's more entertaining. So I suppose it's the British Mickey Mouse for all intents and purposes. Everybody knows Doctor Who. So to
Yeah.
have been on that is, I mean, it was a privilege. It was fantastic to have done that. And it you know, yes, it was my first pro gig, and that was great, but they don't just flow on from there. You think it's not like getting 1,000 subs on YouTube. All right, that's it, we're off, you know.
Yeah.
No, what you get that first professional gig and you think, right, this is it, this is my chance, I'm in there. And it's like, not necessarily, not necessarily at all. You know, the editor that you work with might love your work, but the editor who's currently on Spider-Man might hate you, you know, your work, that is, you know. So it's like, you know, you just don't know, you know, where you're going next. All you can do is do the best job possible, and make sure that you have a good reputation, and that's it, really.
Yeah. So the current work is Only Death Can Save Us. Is that right? Anything you'd like to
Yeah,
share about that?
yeah. Book two went out to the publisher a couple of months back. It's now available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, those kinds of places, Book Palace. Um, you can still get a crowd-funded version, so the original edited version, which is limited print run. I still provide those to my website, but if you just want to go get the edited version over on Amazon, obviously if you're a member of Amazon Prime, you know, it's nothing to get it posted to you, so it makes it a lot cheaper to go through places like that. So that second book is done. The third book is slated for me to start work on that in the new year. Rick and I have already sort of chatted about the story on that. I've just come off a run on Doctor Who magazine, and I did the Doomsday special for them as well. So that may come back. I don't know. You know, they what they like to do is they like to swap around their creative teams, so it keeps it fresh. So that may come back. I don't know. Something will happen at some point. That you know, I get on great with those guys. Right now, I'm working on a version or an adaptation of the first Cull book, which is now in public domain,
Oh,
and
nice.
that's by Robert E. Howard, and that's
Uh-huh.
the Shadow Kingdom. Randy Zimmerman of Arrow Comics has adapted that, and we're looking to publish that as something called Arrow Legends. So
Love
what we'd
it.
like to do is we'd like to do like a Cull, maybe a Tarzan.
Uh-huh.
Maybe at some point we'd do maybe the Spider, the
Hmm.
Shadow, anything that's in public domain, which has got that kind of appeal to it, and put that out. So what we'd like to do is maybe do 3 or 4 of those kind of books. The way that I'm doing is I'm inking it and then putting a wash, an ink wash over it, and then we'll
Hmm.
put flat colors behind it. So that will be what we publish, and then we might put them all together as an art book and make like a bigger, thicker, you know, bigger size pages format, so that we can sell it as an art book afterwards. So that's the project I'm currently in. That's the thing that's got most of my attention at the moment. But
I
like I
love
say,
it.
I'll be back on Only Death in the new year. So
I love the pulp story, so would love to see
yeah.
that.
Oh yeah, I mean this I'm absolutely thoroughly enjoying myself with it.
Yeah.
It's a slightly different style for me as well. I'm putting in a bit more detail
Hmm.
and texture. Something that I did in the Only Death material. The first book was very much an homage to the 60s and 70s. So
Hmm.
there was a lot of inspiration from people like John Buscema and Kirby and that kind of feel. The second one was more sort of 80s, maybe a bit more Stalin, you know, that kind of stuff. And there is a change in the story for the third book, and it actually is kind of meta, where
Hmm.
it makes everything look slightly different. So my style will now move on to maybe sort of not a 90s style, but something a bit more, you know, there's a bit more detail in it and a bit more texture.
Love it.
And so I'm kind of doing that with Only Death, and at the same time I'm doing these black and white work with the legend stuff. So it's all development. It's all just, you know, pressing forward, and certainly I've always loved Conan and Carl and that kind of stuff,
Hmm.
and having a crack at Tarzan would be quite cool as well.
Definitely.
But yeah, and the Shadow, I'd love to do a Shadow book, and at
Hmm.
some point a Western as well would be fantastic. But it all depends what comes up really, and how well, you know, you got to come down to figures as well. Do they sell well, you know?
Hmm.
um
Hmm.
but I mean, I got around just over 300 people in the end buying the Only Death Can Save Us book. So you know, it's not a bad amount for crowdfunding. That's not a bad figure. uh what I'd aim to is at some point in time, if I could get my audience up to around 500, that would be
Hmm.
perfect to do a couple of books a year. So,
Yeah.
and I can intersperse that with any professional work that comes my way. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll feature the website when I share this and
okay.
all of those sort of things. Any spaces that people can go to follow your work or any upcoming events that you'd like to mention?
Um, you can find me at russleach.com.
Hmm.
So all my social medias are there. I have my own YouTube channel, Comic Book Black Belt, and on there I've got some stuff about my process. I've got some reviews of stuff that I love and all that kind of thing. So there's also quite a lot of in-depth analysis of the work that I've done, some of the Ben 10 stuff and that kind of thing. So it's quite an interesting view of the way that I do things. I don't consider these things tutorials. They're just like saying, look, this is the way I do it. If that's helpful, then brilliant. So you can get to that through russleach.com. I go on to Indie Comics Network with Randy and Glenn Fleming. We at the moment we're doing something called Comics by Night on a Friday morning. It's very early, but you can you can pick them up later during the day. And at the moment we're running through Watchmen.
Oh, nice.
But we've
Nice.
done Buscema and Steranko and what have you. And we've gone through books and basically sort of looked at the way that the art was done, the way the stories were put together. So it's an analysis. I suppose it's a little bit like comic kayfabe, except longer form. Because I love those guys and what they do. So we would just sit there and check that stuff out. There's a bit of chat and what have you. So we do that. So yeah, you can pick me up there. But pretty much everything you can get through russleach.com.
Fantastic. All right. All right. I'll be sure and share the website and the
Thank
YouTube.
you.
Anything that I've missed that you'd like to make sure to share?
No, not really. Just I from a personal perspective, I think at the moment independent comics are the future. It's everything. It's where all the creativity is at the moment. It's where all the buzz is. It's where people are making new things. And without getting involved in all the rubbish that goes on with it, just support indie creators. Just
Yeah.
get out there and do it and read great books and be nice to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much to discover in indie books.
Yes,
So
there is.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with me.
No problem at all. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, my pleasure, and glad to talk with you anytime.
Cheers. Thank you. I'll see you
Thank
again
you.
soon.
Sounds great.
Bye bye.